All right, so ready to dive in. We're going deep into pre-Civil War Nigeria, right as the Biafran War is about to erupt. But we're ditching the dry history books this time around. We're using Half of a Yellow Sun as our guide.
Ah, excellent choice. Adichie really brings those times to life. And you know what's really striking? It's how she takes these huge historical events and makes them feel so personal.
It's the personal stories that really get you. Like, I was struck by the contrast Adichie paints between the haves and the have-nots. One minute you're in an opulent home, the next you're practically battling cockroaches in a cramped kitchen.
It's a powerful way to highlight the inequality that already existed. Makes you really think about how those disparities might have fueled the conflict later on.
Right, and it's impossible to ignore when you're thrown into Ugu's story. Imagine going from a rural village to serving a university professor. Talk about culture shock.
Ugu's perspective is so crucial to the novel because he's both a participant and an observer. He doesn't just witness the events, he's deeply affected by them.
Absolutely. That scene where he's practically speechless over his employer's modern kitchen just stuck with me. It's like a tiny detail, but it speaks volumes about the gap between their worlds.
Adichie has this incredible talent for taking these small, everyday moments and making them crackle with emotion. You're not just reading about history, you're experiencing it right alongside Ugwu.
And that's what makes it so powerful, right?
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? It's not like we get this big dramatic announcement that war has begun. It's much more subtle. Whispers here, anxieties there. You feel the tension mounting like a pressure cooker ready to blow.
Oh, absolutely. It's in those little details. The way characters start acting differently, the fear in their eyes, that tense train ride they take, the frantic escape from Nasuka, even the bombing in Port Harcourt. It's all so visceral.
Adichie really nails those moments of raw human experience.
It makes you think, if I were in their shoes, how would I react?
It's easy to think we understand what it was like, but to really be inside those characters' heads during those times,
Especially for someone like Olanna, she starts out pretty sheltered, right?
yeah, she's definitely living a life of privilege at the beginning.
But then the war changes everything. She's forced to confront the realities of what's happening around her.
It's a huge turning point for her character.
It makes you realize how quickly life can change, how things we take for granted can be upended in an instant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as the war intensifies, we see how everyday life becomes a struggle just to survive.
Just finding food becomes a challenge.
Exactly. And then there's the constant threat of violence,
Yeah.
the loss of loved ones.
It's bleak. But even in those dark moments, there's this remarkable resilience that shines through.
It's true. People find ways to adapt to cope, to keep going.
Like Kane with her work at the refugee camp.
Exactly. Or those who start creating these makeshift farms. They refuse to give up hope.
It's incredibly inspiring to see how people find the strength to keep going in the face of such adversity. And it's in those moments of resilience where we see relationships really put to the test, pushed to the brink in ways you couldn't even imagine during peacetime.
Right. Like Olanna making the choice to stay in Biafra.
And Richard wrestling with being a journalist in the middle of all the chaos.
It's those kind of impossible choices they're forced to make that really get you thinking.
Absolutely. And Adichie doesn't shy away from those complexities either. Loyalty, betrayal, forgiveness, they all come into play in ways that make you question everything.
Especially when the world is literally falling apart around you.
And it's not just romantic relationships either. It's about how we stay true to ourselves, to our values, when everything's on the line.
I think it's those questions of character that make this novel so powerful. We see characters wrestling with their own flaws, their prejudices, their capacity for love, even in the face of such suffering.
It really makes you wonder how you'd measure up in those circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's Ugwu. His journey throughout all of this is just heartbreaking. He goes from this innocent young man to witnessing horrors most of us can't even fathom.
And that image of him returning to Nasuka, finding his old employer's home in ruins, it's like a punch to the gut.
It really drives home the devastating impact of the war.
And through it all, he's still searching for Ebereki, holding on to that tiny sliver of hope.
His story, I think, really highlights those invisible scars that war leaves behind, the ones that run much deeper than anything physical.
Absolutely. It makes you realize that even when the fighting stops the trauma, the loss, it lingers.
But even with all the devastation, Adichie doesn't leave us completely without hope. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. Even though we just focus on excerpts today, you can sense this fragile hope, this determination to rebuild, to find a way forward, even in a world that's been irrevocably changed.
It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit, isn't it? Even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there's this inherent desire to survive, to heal, to create something better.
Exactly. And that's what I think makes Half of a Yellow Sun so impactful. It's not just about the Biafran War itself. It's about the power of individual stories to help us connect with history, to understand the human cost of conflict on a deeply personal level.
It makes those historical events feel so much more real, so much more immediate.
It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about real people with real lives. And by engaging with their stories, by hearing their voices, we honor their experiences and keep their memories alive.
I think that's a great note to end on. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, and that stories like these have the power to connect us all.
Beautifully said. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Half of the Yellow Sun. Thanks for joining us as we explored this incredibly powerful and moving novel.